Okay, I think we can get started. Looks like we have a great group. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar on our need to rethink fraud in America, presented by AARP. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available afterwards and sent out in an email to all attendees to view. And at any point, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as possible after the presentation before the session is over. First, just a bit about us. We're the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and we're a nonprofit organization on a mission to empower a more secure, interconnected world. And we do this by creating free educational resources for families, small businesses, schools, older adults, really anyone that uses technology or interacts with the internet. And we try to give them simple, basic tips on how to stay safe online, how to secure their personal information and their financial information. So we do this by offering free resources through our website, StaySafeOnline.org, and running a number of educational campaigns throughout the year. One of them coming up soon is Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, which many of you, if you're subscribed to our mailing list, may be familiar with already. Maybe you're signed up to participate or receive our materials. If not, I encourage you to go to the link on the screen to learn more about this campaign, as it's coming up very soon. But I also wanted to highlight it because I think this presentation is particularly important as we head into Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I know a number of you that plan to participate will be, maybe writing blogs and social media posts, emails to employees with tips and advice. So I think you'll find a lot of great information in here to keep in mind as you communicate with employees about cybersecurity and preventing scams and fraud as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy Stokes, Director of Fraud Prevention Programs at AARP. Kathy, you can go ahead and start sharing your slides.
All right, let me pull it up here. And then just get it into show mode. Everyone see that okay?
Yes, looks good. I think you just need to put it in slideshow mode.
Oh, I thought I did. Okay. There we go.
Perfect.
Looking good? Okay.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for being on this call today. This is a passion project for me and many people at AARP as we see this meteoric rise in fraud and losses and impact on our society. I just want to say right up front, I may be sipping some water as we go. We're turning in DC from summer to fall, and that's always great for the throat and nasal passages. So forgive me if I take some swigs of water. I just want to talk to you a little bit before we get into talking about rethinking fraud, about the Fraud Watch Network and AARP. And then we're going to go through this little discussion about how we started looking at how our society uses language that blames victims for the crime they experience. What we learned along the way and what we believe is a path forward to really just fundamentally changing our national response to fraud. And then we're going to open it up to any questions, comments you all have. But I just want to always level set. The AARP organization is a little bit complicated. And a lot of people hear AARP and they think, oh, insurance or, med sup programs or discounts. And we're that, but for one part of the organization. That's our for-profit AARP Services Incorporated, and they're the ones that are out there getting all the great benefits for our 38 million members. The foundation is where we do our charitable work, and then AARP Inc., which we kind of loosely refer to as the enterprise, is where all of our social mission work is. It's where we do all of our advocacy at the federal and state level, and it's where all of our consumer education comes out of, including the program that I'm involved with, the Fraud Watch Network, which has been around for a long time in a few different forms. But what we are is a nationwide effort. We have 53 state offices, and those state offices have fraud fighter volunteers, and they go out into communities every day some virtually now that we've gotten used to that a little bit, but also much of this is in person, and it's going out into those communities and the libraries and other public places to help people understand the significant risk that fraud represents to their retirement security. And we have a ton of information at aarp.org/fraud watch network. We also do a lot of national presentations. We have two major publications that if any of you are 50 or older and a member of AARP have seen, the Bulletin and the AARP Magazine, which are really actually great publications. And we cover fraud in just about every issue to our 38 million members, plus just a whole other range where we're trying to meet people where they are to get this message of fraud prevention and protection out to them. The other part of our Fraud Watch network is victim support. We created a program about 3 years ago, understanding the emotional impact that fraud can have, especially on older adults when they've lost everything. Their family is in disarray because the adult kids are blaming them. They were made to believe something for a very long time. That emotional impact can be profound. So we developed a program with Volunteers of America on this very thing, to spend an hour online with a trained facilitator to talk about your experience and to understand that you're not the only one that's experienced it. And the whole goal is to try to help people sort of integrate that horrible experience into their lives so they can begin to heal and move on. And it's actually based on a program for veterans. It was actually for military returning from the war theater, trying again to integrate what that horrible experience may have been when they were abroad, and so that they can sort of, get back to living their life. I didn't mention it, I should have. We also have a Fraud Watch Network helpline. We get about 100,000 calls a year. Some of them are just people letting us know about the scams that are out there. We report that to the Federal Trade Commission. Some of it is along the lines of, hey, I just got this letter. It really looks legitimate from the Publishers Clearinghouse, and apparently I've won $2 million in a car. Is this legitimate? So we can help talk them through, because these are live people. And then sadly, we always hear from victims and victims' family members about the experience they had. And it's just so tragic, the impact that this is having. And so to move on, I always want to also level set on fraud versus elder financial exploitation. The way we look at it at AARP and sort of how we divide and conquer things is that elder financial exploitation is this large rubric of exploiting older adults financially, right? But with elder financial exploitation, it's typically a known person, the long lost grandson or a crooked caregiver or fiduciary. They're embezzling funds, they're falsifying records, they're doing all of these things, and that person has a personal relationship with the victim. Whereas fraud, which is sort of a subset, but a growing subset, is really the stranger danger scams. At least it's strangers when they first reach out to the victim, to the target. So that's really what we're focused on, that fraud circle. We have to talk a little bit about the scope of fraud. And the big story is we don't know how bad it is. What we only know are what gets reported. And so many people don't report fraud. Sometimes they don't realize it's a crime. Sometimes they have no idea where they would report it to. But most times because they feel humiliated and embarrassed and just want it to go away. But what we do know, and I always look at the Federal Trade Commission as sort of my guideline, $9 billion in reported losses in 2022. Note on the right, that is Federal Trade Commission data that tells us that before the pandemic, reported losses were 2.4 billion. That's why I call it a meteoric rise. And that all comes so much from all of us going online to do everything and the criminals following us. The FBI, though, looking at just cybercrime, sees losses of 10.3 billion in 2022, which is higher than what the FTC sees, and all fraud. And then you look at this report that Javelin Strategy and Research does every year. It's a big identity fraud survey. Losses in 2022 to identity fraud, including identity fraud scams, $43 billion. So sadly, we don't know how bad this is. We know it's horrible and getting worse. And it's something that AARP and some others are really trying to work toward to really understand, the at least a floor of what's really happening out there. And I also use the Federal Trade Commission data to dispel this myth. Most people think that fraud happens to old people, right? Cognitive decline, not tech savvy, too nice to hang up the phone. All of these are really myths. The reality is that younger people who report fraud report losing money more often than older adults do. The tragedy is that when the older adult is the victim, they typically have assets, right? Unlike a 23-year-old who may be just starting out and loses $400 or $500, and that's terrible, and it shouldn't have happened. That 83-year-old has just lost $200,000, and there's no means of restitution, and no way for them to go back into the workforce and get their money back. So that's why AARP is so concerned about fraud, because those losses are so high as we age. So about 3 or 4 years ago, my team, which had just come together in 2019, we started talking about what are some really big things that we can do to really impact the fraud landscape. And one of them was we wanted to take one scam and just message the heck out of it being a scam. And we turned that into messaging that anytime somebody's telling you that you can pay some obligation or send them money using a gift card and sharing the numbers off the back, it is a scam 100% of the time. We're going into our 4th year of trying to get that out to everybody. We also developed the victim support program, the online program, as a part of that strategy session. And then we also started talking at that time with our helpline volunteers and staff who were like, every time someone calls us, they're blaming themselves, saying, I got duped. I can't believe I fell for this. And their adult children are doing the same thing. And so we really wanted to look at that and understand if that's a societal thing. And if it is, understand what's behind it and possibly what its impact has been. And then also look at those times in our history where we have been able to successfully change a narrative for the betterment of society. So going in, we knew this. If you're experiencing one of the other crimes, right, the big buckets, violent property crimes, we typically react with empathy and concern. Oh, that poor family. Maybe I'll bake them a lasagna. You want to be by their side and you want to support them. Well, when it comes to financial crimes, and in this I'm talking about scams, we react by saying things like, you got duped by that? That's the oldest trick in the book. Or, you'd have to be an idiot. I would never fall for that. Or my favorite, how much money did you give them? And then the scam victim internalizes all of that and just excoriate themselves. I can't believe I fell for this. How could I be so stupid, so embarrassed, so ashamed? Don't even want to tell the family. And then we see it in the headlines we read as well. And you see more of them on fraud and fraud losses these days. But the focus is on the victim having not known something or having done something wrong, instead of saying that a criminal perpetrated a crime. So here are some examples of real life headlines from just the last couple of months. Vermont woman duped out of life savings. I feel so stupid. Senior scammed out of her life savings. And elderly North Hills woman duped of $49,000. Where's the crime and the criminal in those headlines? It's really just implicitly there. What we're saying is somebody fell for it. They got swindled, they got duped, they got tricked. That's not a crime. It's a crime when somebody misleads you and makes you believe something that isn't true and steals from you. That's what's happening in fraud. Also, to talk a little bit about some, long time research that AARP, FINRA Investor Education Foundation, other organizations have been involved with 20, 30 years. And it's that the criminal has a playbook, and that playbook is shared far and wide among the criminal enterprises, that basically says, if you can get that target into a heightened emotional state right at the front of that conversation you're having with them, they call it getting you into the ether, then they've got you, because our brains work this way, right? If we're reacting out of emotion, That's a different part of our brain than logic. So if they get us to be afraid or in panic or falling in love or excited, I just won the Publishers Clearinghouse, we're up in a place in our brains where it's really hard to back out and access logical thinking. So they're really hijacking our brains. And that's why we really have to look at this crime not as something that's the fault of the victim. It happens to everybody of every demographic. And it's not having anything to do with any demographic element. It's because the criminals know how to beat our brains. So in keeping with the criminals playbook concept, sort of a newer concept my team and I have been working on is like, if you really think about it, probably 85% of all scams start with three red flags coming together. And that is a contact out of the blue. Your grandson calls at 3 a.m. and he's in jail and in big trouble. And it yields high emotion. Oh my gosh, my grandson is in trouble. I need to help him. And urgency. Grandma, I need the money now. Or I'm not getting out of jail. Please don't tell mom and dad, but just send the money. Those three things that come together is what helps to evade our logical part of our brain. And that's how the criminal succeeds. And again, I will say, because of this, it is not the victim's fault. We also have this sense that we're invincible from fraud. Really, I'd never fall for that, or it only happens to old people, or, really, that victim just should have known better. But tragically, the all too human toll is that we lose billions and billions and billions of dollars every year. Little chance of ever getting that money back. FINRA Investor Education Foundation did a study, I think 2019, 2020. Nearly 2 out of 3 victims report that they have experienced, along with the financial loss, at least one serious, significant health or emotional impact. And sadly, thousands of people who are victims of these crimes die by suicide. So this is sort of what led us up to a study that we did with our friends over at FINRA and Heart and Mind Strategies, really good consulting group. Together, we worked beginning, I think, in 2021, looking at doing a lit review. They did all that for us, doing a scrape of media and entertainment and social media, review of case studies where our country has successfully changed a narrative for the better. We talked to 30 different experts, and we did qualitative interviews and a quantitative survey. And in that survey, I find this a little bit like a dichotomy. 85% of people say, yeah, fraud can happen to anyone, but 53% think it's the victim that's to blame. We found in this paper that there are 3 primary drivers of blame in our society, and that first is attribution bias, what I was saying before. Person's old, not tech savvy. There's something wrong with that person that allowed that crime to happen to them. The other is the just world theory that, yeah, the world's a pretty good place and you get what you deserve. Sort of embedded in that is this American sense of rugged individualism. You pull yourself up from your bootstraps. What happens to you is on you. And the dimensions are at all levels. At the interpersonal level, it's blaming ourselves. It's our friends and family blaming us, even if they're not meaning to, using the language that makes us really feel responsible for the crime we experience. At the institutional level, very sadly, there are people that answer phones at police offices, right? And someone will call and say they're a victim of a scam. And that person, having no knowledge, probably not even law enforcement, saying, well, that's not a crime. You gave them your money. And I will say there are a lot of financial crimes investigators out there that get it. But we had a woman, I think it was about a month ago now, who called our helpline. She had lost over $80,000 to this horrible fraud. She calls the police, and the police, whoever it was that answered, said, you don't deserve our help. So that's at the institutional level. We also have the issue where, people will call their bank and say, I thought I was talking to you and now my money's gone. And depending on the institution, depending on situations, the customer service center may not recognize that as a crime and that you've been a victim. And in the end, anyway, you can't get your money back. And then, of course, the societal, we see, like I said, the media headlines, we see streaming shows that, kind of paint the criminal as the clever con, and the victim as someone who is, frankly, blameworthy. But the really cool thing about the study is that we found that, yeah, we use the language of blame all the time, but we don't really mean it. It's not as much about how we truly feel as it is the words that we've just become accustomed to using. And we know it's rooted in cultural values. It's driven by issues we can address. But how do we do that? Well, we think it begins with flipping the narrative, right? You didn't get scammed, you didn't get duped. What if you said to the victim, falling victim is not your fault? It's the fault of the criminal who perpetrated the crime. I am sorry that you've experienced this. We can reframe with our words instead of saying things like, you got scammed, how could you fall for that? Or using words like duped, swindled, tricked. Those words, those phrases, they imply that the victim is to blame, and it inspires them to feel shame. Why not say, it's not your fault. These criminals, they're really good at what they do, and you experienced a crime. Show empathy, empower that victim. What if that victim didn't feel to blame and actually got mad and wanted to do something about it? I think for one thing, we'd have a whole lot more reporting. I also want us to think about the language we use when we talk about the criminals. And I was just talking to somebody about this today at the Fed. Fraudster, it's used all the time. But doesn't that sound kind of cute? Scammer even. It doesn't give you that sense of crime. Con artist doesn't either. What if we got rid of all that and we used words like criminal and perpetrator? What if instead of saying she gave him her money, that we said a criminal stole her money? We believe that if we choose our words with intention, if we do a heck of a lot more in the society to support victims and help them through their healing journey, if we broaden portrayals, it's not just older people with cognitive decline who are experiencing fraud. Humanizing through storytelling, we're doing this a lot. We have a podcast. It's called The Perfect Scam. And unlike other true crime podcasts, this is really about the impact on the victim, the impact on society. It's about the people out there trying to go after the bad guys. And it has such impact. We have a woman that we work with who's a romance scam survivor. And she goes around the country with our state offices. We just did a bunch together, a couple in the last 2 weeks. And she goes out and talks to the community about what happened to her. And the conversation begins with people sort of going, yeah, how could that have happened? That's silly. You shouldn't have believed that. In the end, and going, oh my God, I am so sorry this happened to you. So we really have to do a lot more victim storytelling to humanize. And in the end, we have to go after the criminals. We're not really doing that right now. We think all of this can happen if we change that narrative and really change how we think about it, not just how we talk about it. More victims would report. More family relationships would be protected if the adult kids in that older adult's family realize that it's not mom's fault, it's not dad's fault. They were intentionally targeted by criminals, not just any criminal, transnational criminal enterprises, right? And they've got the playbook. Maybe police, like that person who answered the phone that I told you about, would take it seriously and understand that fraud is a crime, not just a civil matter. Prosecutors really don't want to take these cases. They think they're dog cases. They think that, especially an older victim would not wouldn't be good on the stand. We work with an assistant DA who's retired from San Diego. He made his career 28 years of prosecuting elder financial exploitation cases and fraud cases within that. So he's proven that these are good cases, juries get it, and these bad guys can go to jail. Policymakers, They're starting to focus on this more because I think they're seeing it more from their own districts and their own states through their constituent services. But until we can tell them that it's not unknown how bad this is, they're not going to do much. But if they understood the true victim impact, maybe they would act, and those billions and billions and billions of dollars would stay in people's accounts and in our economy. So what I ask in these conversations is for all of us to be the change. Every one of us has agency to work toward this change in our society. Encourage different word choices, use them yourself. And then if someone's saying, yeah, she got swindled, do a little education. Well, actually, that was a crime, and she experienced a loss from a criminal. Use words that acknowledge that there's a playbook, that these are transnational criminal enterprises. These are criminals. Respond to victims with empathy and concern, and report, report, report. We are such a victim ourselves of underreporting, and we sort of even lost track over these many last 2 decades, I'd say, of even calling fraud a crime. And we say, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. But if we do more reporting, if police, FBI, other federal authorities are hearing more about what's happening, I think that would really light a fire under our sort of societal reaction to going after and combating this crime. And I always want to share this at the end. It's really so sad. This is a message that a detective working with the FBI investigator who was working in elder fraud, and he received this message from a victim. And I think it really tells us why we need to change how we think about it, how we talk about it. What she basically said to him is, what you don't know is my life. I was a daughter, a wife, a mother. My husband and I were the power couple. We were respected in our companies. But now I see disappointment in my children's eyes. They see me as the person who gave away our family money. I seriously contemplated suicide during this mess. I was devastated. Please remember, I am a person who failed her children, and that is what hurts me the most. Guys, as a society, we cannot continue to allow victims of crimes to feel that they have failed their families. And now we can open it up to discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jennifer, did we get any questions?
Yeah, so let's see. We have a question here. How do the criminals find out about personal information, like having a grandchild?
So much of it is our data are out there, and fraud is now it's fraud as a service. So I might be really good at capturing personal information. I might know what most people who are on social media don't know, that my account isn't protected because I signed up for Facebook not knowing that there were protections I could use to just sort of, lock it down. So it's only my family and friends that see. Or, I didn't know I shouldn't put my birth date in there. I didn't know I shouldn't put where my high school is. I didn't know this. And I didn't know that everybody and their brother was seeing what I was posting. So the fraud as a service guy goes, I'm really good at getting that information. And he compiles all that information and then he sells it on the dark web. Also with data breaches, so aside from the personal things, the identity fraud that comes out of data breaches and identity fraud scams where they convince you to share information puts us almost in a post-prevention space. Like, our data are out there, but we can do things to lock things down to be less likely that we would experience identity fraud, like putting at least a fraud alert on your credit reports, Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. Better yet, do a credit freeze. It's free, and you can unfreeze them. It's a bit laborious, but that means that nobody is opening an account in your name using your identity while you're locked down like that. We have to be better at at our account safety, security, logins, the passwords where we use some sort of similar password for everything is convenient, easy to remember, and a boon to criminals, because once they break one, it's easy for them to go across all your accounts and break the others. You could use a password manager, although I think one of the biggest password managers not too long ago itself got hacked. They had one job, right, to protect our passwords. But you can write them down. You can store them. I actually store mine on my iPhone, and there's a notes. If you have a notes section on your smartphone, you can actually encrypt one of the notes, and that's where I put mine right now. But we've got to do that. We have to make sure that our systems, and you guys know this, we need to keep our operating systems updated. It's not just because there's a new feature. It's because they're also patching known vulnerabilities. Keep that virus, that malware software up to date.
Great. We have a question here. What are the best ways to report fraud, and to whom?
If you've experienced a fraud loss, call the police. When the police say to you, that's not a crime, to say, yes, it actually is a crime, and I have a right to file a report. Get them to file that report, even if they make you go online and file it and they're not going to do anything about it. Think about it, because there's some discussion at the state level really right now of kind of trying to come up with like victim compensation funds, since the losses are so dramatic, especially for older adults. What if your state passes this, but you don't have any proof by a police report that you experienced fraud? So at least for that reason, but also to get that volume up there and let them know what's happening. And then, report it to the Federal Trade Commission, reportfraud.ftc.gov. Does that sound right?
I think that's right. Yep. We can include a link to that after the webinar too.
Yeah, include the link. They changed it recently and it doesn't stick in my head. The important thing about that is they're not going to work on your specific case, but law enforcement has access to this huge database that they collect, and they can go in there and see trends and understand what's happening, and hopefully, protect someone from becoming the next victim.
We have a question here. How can we help? Do you have resources that we can use within our companies or local 55 plus communities? Maybe offer a seminar at the local library. I'll actually quickly plug one of the resources from the National Cybersecurity Alliance. We have a toolkit on how to volunteer in your community to talk to others about online safety. And we have a presentation specifically for older adults and older communities with some suggested talking points and how to give a presentation. So we can include a link to that after the webinar. But Kathy, do you have any resources you would like to share with the audience after the webinar as well?
Yeah, so we have a lot of really great information on the Fraud Watch Network webpage, but we also have thousands of volunteers around the country. You can come to AARP and volunteer on our helpline. It's not a hotline, so it's not like a 24/7 thing, but you get trained to take the calls and help people walk through what happened and give them whatever guidance is most current. We also have people that are out in community, right, giving presentations, and you could sign up to be a volunteer fraud fighter with any of our state offices. I think if you go to aarp.org/near-you, you can find access to your state office and where you can apply if volunteering is what you'd like to do, and we would love to have you.
Does AARP offer cybersecurity education seminars for seniors?
So we have a subsidiary called OATS, OATS. I don't know a ton about them, but that's what they're all about. I can get you a link, Jennifer, and we can put that in the notes as well. And then we have a bunch of different fraud presentations that our volunteers give, and we do have one on cybersecurity, online safety.
Great. And could you, you mentioned podcast earlier. Could you repeat the name of the podcast?
Yes, it's called The Perfect Scam, and you can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is kind of a bigger question, maybe a tough one, but How can large tech companies protect people? What do you think large tech companies can do to protect people?
Follow CISA's guidelines. Think of security as you're designing. Make things secure by default. For the companies that are out there doing tremendous work and creating challenges for criminals to go after infrastructure, government, business, we need that kind of effort in protecting consumers. And it's not necessarily a nifty app, right? Because it's still on us. We've got to be able to access the internet safely. We have to be able to return to using our phones and trusting who calls. There's so much that can be done, that needs to be done. And then I really think in the tech world, it starts with security as part of the design and in the default, and not an afterthought.
We have a question. If we would like to partner with AARP to spread the security message, who should we reach out to?
You can send an email to my team. It's FWN, that stands for Fraud Watch Network, at AARP.org.
See, are there any? It's like we've got a lot of great comments, people looking for resources and the presentation afterwards. So we will send out an email by tomorrow with all of these follow-up resources and a recording of the webinar.
I see another question here about how accurately can we trace where or which countries the money goes. And that's an interesting question, because I think we all understand that a lot of the criminal activity begins in another country, right? But they have people on the ground in the United States that are moving the money for them, that are laundering the money. And we need to go after those guys to make it more difficult for the guys in India or wherever they are to do what they do. Some things, you're just not going to trace. You can't trace cash, right? You may not be able to trace, you can't really trace it when someone gives over the number off of the back of a gift card. But if you experience that and realize it was a fraud and you contact the number on the back of that card, they might be able to claw some money back for you, because the criminals are getting so good that they're not as quick to pull the money off of that gift card or empty the wallet, the cryptocurrency wallet. Importantly, about crypto, it is trackable. And there is a big movement, but it's like a grassroots movement in law enforcement to help law enforcement understand that if they have the right tools and training, blockchain is public accounting. All right, so this isn't going after the bad guy, but it's going after that money. And if you can trace where that money ends up going, and it hops all over the place, and it ends up on an exchange, that wallet has the money and ends up on that exchange, a police officer can issue a warrant and have that money returned to the criminal. And this is more possible today because that money's sticking out there a little bit longer than it used to, because there are so many criminals in the game and so much money. And no, it doesn't go after the bad guy necessarily, but it does get at least some of the money potentially back to the victim.
And to that, there's a question here. Is there any movement on getting banks to take more action on this issue?
Well, in other countries, absolutely. Here, it's more of institution by institution, trying to sort of get their hands around this and figure out what to do and how to better protect people. And it varies depending on the institution.
We have a question that just came in. You talked a bit about credit freezes earlier. Can you repeat what is a credit freeze?
So a credit freeze, basically you're telling the three major credit agencies, those are Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, that you want your credit locked down, meaning even if you wanted to take out a loan while that's frozen, you can't. So you're not going to want to do this right before you apply for a loan to get your kid through school or buy a house or a car. But if you're not having that, in the immediate vicinity of time, lock it down. You have to go to each of the three agencies. You can do it online. You can start at annualcreditreport.com to access the three agencies. This is free. Make sure you're signing up for the free credit freeze, because it's easy to mistakenly sign up for something that's actually going to cost you money in addition to getting the freeze. So be careful of that. Also, using Annual Credit Report, you can get a free copy of your credit report. It used to be that you could get one from each of those agencies every year. And so you could get one in January and then get another one from the other one in May and then look at it again in December. Right now, since the pandemic, they've been making your credit report accessible for free online, and you can do it every week if you want to. And it's a really good idea to keep an eye on your credit, because that's where you can start to say, wait a minute, I didn't make that charge, and then try to dispute it. But the credit freezes, it takes some time. And when you go through the process, you really want to, go old school, put a manila folder down on your desk and put some paper in there and write down the process. You're going to have a special password and things like that. And so you can go back to that when you do need to unfreeze and then refreeze.
Someone asked, do credit freezes also freeze credit card applications?
Yes.
And
Any financial contract, a car loan, student loan, opening up a new credit card.
Another question, Kathy, do you have an account on X or Twitter? Where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I've recently terminated my relationship with Twitter, X, whatever they call it now. I haven't been on Facebook for years. I still have my account because honestly, sometimes I use the marketplace. But LinkedIn is the best place. And I think if you just go to linkedin.com and type in Kathy Stokes, you'll find me.
Great. With that, I think we will wrap up. Thank you all so much for attending the presentation this afternoon. If you have any questions for us, feel free to get in touch with StaySafeOnline.org. Our email is info@StaySafeOnline.org. We're also on social media platforms, Twitter, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And as mentioned, a recording of this presentation will be available tomorrow, along with all of the resources and links that we talked about. So Kathy, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this fantastic presentation. I think it gives us all a lot to think about. So we really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate all of you who in one way or form are wanting to educate. One more data point. If you know about a specific scam, you are 80% less likely to engage with that scam and 40% less likely to lose money. So education matters so much, but we cannot educate our way out of this.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jennifer.